You're about to meet the amazing Rachel Gall, an Ivy League student of astrophysics, a dedicated farm worker, a middle school science teacher, and a gifted violinist, or fiddler as she prefers. Okay, well, I'm ready if you are.
Okay.
So where were you born?
I was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And there's someone else in town who was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Who's that?
Henry Todd. Actually, I shouldn't say that he was born. I'm not 100% sure he was born there, but I know that he lived there. Henry Todd lived in Kalamazoo too. I didn't know him. So I lived in Kalamazoo, Michigan. My dad was from Long Island, and my mom was from Meriden, and they met as teenagers. And when my dad finished school at MIT with his PhD in chemistry, he got a job out in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So that was where they moved, and that's where I was born and my two brothers. So I lived out there till I was 13, and after that I lived outside of Syracuse for a year, and then in Morristown, New Jersey, and then in Israel, and then back in Morristown, New Jersey. And then I went to college in New York City, and then I moved up here.
Well, let's go over that in a little more detail.
All right.
Like, how old were you when you moved to Israel?
So I spent my 10th grade year on a kibbutz in Israel, in the northern part, in the Gall, and it was part of an American class program. It was an opportunity my parents had heard about and really wanted me to do. And I see all the opportunities at Hoosie for traveling and exchange, and it is a wonderful thing. It wasn't something I was super excited to do necessarily on my own because I had moved so much. And so I was definitely encouraged by my parents, to take the opportunity, and I'm certainly glad I did. It was a really unusual experience to get to live on a kibbutz. There's very few left. The one I was on is no longer run collectively in the same way because it's, I think it fights human nature a little bit to do things that way. But at the time, it's like its own little village, and I got to learn to work on a tropical fish farm.
And what did you do with the tropical fish?
Oh, so one of the businesses, so on the kibbutz where I was, there was a plastics manufacturing business. Israel was an innovator as far as drip irrigation. So they produced drip irrigation parts. And there was a dairy, there was a hotel, and there was a sunflower oil business, and there was a tropical fish farm. And the tropical fish farm sold tropical fish as pets. So I had, the sort of beginner jobs that go along with that business of cleaning out fish tanks and separating male and female guppies. I can separate male and female guppies. It's a little tricky. You have to sit there and stare at their undersides, but you can figure it out. So that was part of my job. I think they sold kind of like the typical kinds of pet fish that people would have. There were There maybe were a few more exotic ones, but I was not allowed to handle the more expensive of the fish. So yeah. So that was back in, what year was that? That would have been, I was born in 76, so that would have been when I was 15. So 86, 91, 1991, 92. I lived in Kalamazoo, then we moved. I actually spent a year in New Jersey when 4th grade, moved back to Kalamazoo, and then moved outside of Syracuse to Manlius, and then moved to Morristown, New Jersey. My dad worked as a chemist in the pharmaceutical industry, so it was a place where there was kind of more density of the work that he was doing. So my parents, so even though I only was there for high school, so I was only there for 3 years, they were there for over 20 years in Morristown. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you graduated from high school.
Graduated from Morristown High School. Yep.
And went to college.
And I went to college in New York City at Barnard.
That's a good school.
And was very interested at that time in doing the double degree program. I ended up majoring in physics and not doing the double degree program with the Jewish Theological Seminary, but I took some classes at the Jewish Theological Seminary, so that was what had originally attracted me to go to Barnard. I also, by that time, really had a strong sense of like not wanting to keep moving so much, so I was also attracted to the fact that it wasn't too far from where my folks were living. Of course, New York City is like its own world though, so it felt like far away in some ways. And I spent 4 years at Barnard, although one semester I finished in 3.5 years because I spent one semester living in Nantucket. That was a really cool experience, doing astronomy research.
Astronomy?
Yeah,
research.
with the Maria Mitchell Observatory, which is such a cool place. If you ever get a chance, if you're ever on Nantucket, there's this observatory named in honor of Maria Mitchell, who was an astronomer. And there's open houses, you know, you can go and look through their telescope and look at the moon, look at whatever's happens to be overhead that night, and it's just a very interesting place historically and a cool building. So I was doing an internship program that they had and got to live on Nantucket for a fall. So after the tourist season too, it was really nice. It was very quiet. Did a lot of biking. That was a really cool place.
What did you get out of astronomy?
Well, so I majored in physics and really like going into my own head and being theoretical and wondering about things and then poking out enough to say, oh, let me get hands-on a little bit and then think about it some more. And you know, astronomy and physics really let me do that a lot. So the astronomy research I was doing had to do with shifts. It had to do kind of the classic Doppler shift, using the Doppler shift to figure out the distance to some, at that time, recently observed star clusters. And the data I was using was actually from Arizona, from a telescope out in Arizona that's often used by college students for research. So yeah, it was wonderful opportunities. I mean, as a physics major, I did that, and I also had the opportunity one summer to work at Fermilab, which is a particle accelerator, and work on their NuTev, which was a neutrino neutrino research project, and those opportunities were, you know, ones that you could apply for as a physics major, as an undergraduate. So when I finished college at Barnard with my physics degree, at that time I had the intention of being a science teacher. In fact, I had taken a couple classes at Teachers College. And I also was very, very, very unhealthy. Very unhealthy. I had digestive problems that I just couldn't seem to kick, and I'd gone to the, you know, different medical specialists through the college, and I found myself kind of really stuck. I knew I had to finish school, and I kind of dragged myself through my senior year because I felt really very honored and privileged to have the opportunity to be there, and that my parents were offering this, and I wasn't gonna screw that up, so to speak. It was like, okay, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna finish it, and I knew I needed to do, you know, well enough, and I managed to do that. I graduated with honors.
Did you go on and get your master's?
And I just needed to not be in school, and I also really maybe kind of classic middle class kid of that era, like had no life skills at all as far as, you know, living on my own or figuring out what to do. And I had a friend from high school, Dan Rosenberg, who actually lives in Greenfield, Mass, and ran a company. He founded a company, which I think he's since turned over to others, but called Real Pickles. Really wonderful pickles. If you're up at Guido's or up at Big Y, you can find them there. Anyway, so he was very interested in food and food systems, and was just starting his journey that led him to found this pickle company. And he said, well, maybe you could work on my friend's farm in Amenia, New York. And so that's what I did. I mean, it was a little more complicated than that because I was thinking about working at a summer camp, and kind of things happened, and I ended up working at this startup CSA, Community Supported Agriculture farm in Amenia, New York, called Still Point Community Farm. At age 22 to 24, I worked for him and learned things I just never would have thought I would have learned, about eating and food and how to grow food. And, I was really starting from scratch with all of it. How to drive a stick shift, how to chop up an onion properly. So just so many things. And so that was part of a big turnaround in my health, in my physical health, in my digestive health. So all those things happened. I ended up in total spending 6 years working on farms before I finally circled back to getting my teaching degree. So I do now have a master's, to answer your question in a long-winded way, in education, but it was not a direct path after college.
Where are you teaching now?
So now I teach down in New Milford. I teach at Schaghticoke Middle School in New Milford.
High school level?
It's middle school.
Middle
So
school.
it's 8th grade. Yep.
Uh-huh.
Yep. It's fun.
And you're a science teacher?
I get to teach science, which is what I had set out to do, so it's kind of satisfying in that way, because I actually, when I first got certified, it was a little faster for me to become certified in math for a variety of reasons, just because of the credits I already had. And at that time, I was working and was, no longer a student, and so I needed to earn a living, so it was, advantageous to me to go the faster route and get certified in math. And so I taught math for 3.5 years at Salisbury Central. And then when my daughter was born, I made the fateful decision to shift gears and do work that I could do at home, and mostly be a stay-at-home parent and, you know, do some fiddle teaching and tutoring and things like that. And always had in the back of my mind, like, oh, I want to be a science teacher, I want to be a science teacher, I want to be a science teacher. So it's satisfying to finally, you know, finally have taken all the steps to get there. It was definitely a non-linear path. So I teach 8th grade science down in Schaghticoke. I realized that I love working with middle school teachers. I mean, there's something about them, like there's something about doing that work where you have to have a sense of humor. You have to have this kind of faith in humanity. You just have to. And I love it, because otherwise sometimes when I'm with other adults, I feel like it can get so dark and cynical so fast. And it's just, you know, like there's none of that when you're teaching. I mean, like you certainly vent a little bit, but it's just, you know, I can't explain it, I guess, but it's a great experience. It's a good experience overall. And yeah, people, they definitely make me laugh every day and make me think a lot about the future and about what my role is, you know, and kind of make me appreciate too when I'm not at school. I always tell the kids, school is 1/4 the time you're awake in a year. 3/4 of the time you're not there, you know? So it's really important, and it's also really not the only important thing at all. You know, it's like we're here to do certain things that, you know, you can do best together and tell certain stories that our ancestors thought were important to pass on and give you some information, and then, you know, go do other things, go be outside. So when I'm here, I'm really not, you know, not thinking about that and thinking about what we're doing here, homesteading, except of course when I have to grade all day, as my kids would point out. when I have to grade, do my grading days, I am thinking about school. There's no way around that. But
When did you move to Falls Village?
yeah, so we moved in 15 years ago, and we moved from Cornwall. I was living in Cornwall in a little kind of one-room washroom house that was out behind Jay's grandfather's house, and had been building this house, working on it for a few years. So it was kind of a process, because we had, so let's see, so I was 24 when I met Jay, and we had thought about living in a lot of different places. He had grown up in Cornwall and then moved to Falls Village, and then moved back to Cornwall, and you know, he hadn't explored really living anywhere else. He came with me to Amherst, Mass. We lived in Leverett for 6 months while I got my teaching certification. But he was interested in having some land, and you know, we just figured there's no way we're ever going to afford land in Litchfield County. I wanted like a half an acre. He was thinking at least 40. So this piece of land actually has acreage with it, and I found it on the internet. It was just one of those freak things. Like, was looking, saw it on the internet. I'm trying to remember what year that was. So that would have been like 19 years ago now. So we called right up about it, because it was less expensive than we anticipated, and they wanted to move it quickly, it turns out, and it was just kind of like boom, boom, boom. And then we had to get special permission. I remember going to the meeting, and Pat McCare was there. It was, you know, I guess it was planning and zoning. We had to get special permission to build a house here, because it was only, there's only, like, you have to have at least 150 feet of road frontage. and we didn't quite have that. So it comes like the land kind of where you came up the driveway, you know, it's basically just a little wider than our driveway right there, and then it spreads out. So we had to get special permission to build a house. I remember realizing when we started to explore like how to get the permits to build, realizing that everyone in town who we talked to was like, oh, we'll figure it out, because they were pretty excited to have like a young couple moving into town. You know what I mean? There was definitely that. I mean, and not just, oh, definitely. Like we still had to go through a process. We still weren't sure, 100% sure, but there was definitely like support, it seemed like, for, you know, making that work. So that was kind of neat to see. And yeah, so we got the permits and built it, but it took us a few years to build. You know, it wasn't happening fast. But then when I got pregnant with Darwin, I don't know how Jay did it, honestly. He's kind of a workaholic. I mean, he works a lot. So because he was running his business and then he built this, you know, just kind of amazing to think about. So we moved, so that was when, then we moved to Falls Village. It was that January, 15 years ago. Kind of wild.
How did you meet?
How did I meet Jay? So Jay I met in Cornwall when I was living with Deborah Tyler. She knew his family and had actually said, oh, if you want to meet young people, go to his brother Wade's house. So went down there and met his family, met him, and we definitely like hit it off pretty quickly. We were curious. I would say we were curious about each other pretty quickly. We're definitely kind of like coming from very different places. So I always tell this story, but this is the story. I'm talking to him. It's the first time I'm talking to him. And you know, you say like, well, what do you do, right? And so I'm telling him about working for Deborah and working for the Ridgeways, and he was certainly very familiar. He was very familiar with Deborah. He grew up homesteading. His parents logged with horses. He was been around animals, you know. So everything I was saying, and this is true of him in general, it's like he had a story about, or had something to add, or had, you know, something really interesting to say about it. And then I said, what do you do? And he said, well, I work in the woods. And I just had no idea what that even meant, you know, like, what do you do in the woods? I'm imagining like a laptop in the woods, you know, what do you do in the woods? And so he started describing logging and what he does. And I said, well, how do you get the trees out of the woods? And he said, I pull them out with my skidder. And I said, what's a skidder? And he said, you'll have to come see my skidder. So he actually, I can't remember when, you know, but like pretty soon after that, I went with him to one of his log jobs, and he let me drive his skidder. I don't know, like for a little city girl, that was pretty exciting. And he just continued to wow me. One day he taught me how to crochet and how to run a chainsaw on the same day. So I still learn a lot from Jay. And we were together from that. It was 24 when we met, and then we got married in 2008. So it was 30. How old was I? In 2008. I have to do the math. So I definitely couldn't have. I can't take credit for planning, you know, like when I think about it now, parenting and having the little school at Kellogg right there and having the high school right there, I mean, it's been really great for my kids, you know, for them to be able to just have their school nearby and be active in all the extra clubs and stuff, you know. Yeah, we're very fortunate, very fortunate.